The sun had long dipped below the horizon when Flight 452 began its agonizing descent into open water. Passengers strained at their seatbelts as the aircraft pitched violently, metal groaning under an invisible pressure. Below them stretched the endless, moonlit expanse of the Pacific Ocean, serene on the surface but treacherous and unfathomable beneath. Mark Henderson, a retired Navy SEAL on his way home, monitored the gauges with steely calm. Beside him, Donovan, a marine biologist returning from a research conference, gripped the armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. When the engine sputtered and died, a collective gasp echoed through the cabin, and then complete darkness. The impact felt less like a crash and more like an explosion of white foam and shrapnel. Water surged through the broken fuselage, carrying luggage, oxygen masks, and human bodies into the cold abyss. The roaring engines had been replaced by Claire's rapid intake of breath, the frantic pounding of waves against metal, and the desperate cries of survivors. Mark's training kicked in instantly. He unbuckled his seatbelt and felt the cold water wash over his chest. His SEAL instincts, honed through years of combat, told him to stay low and secure an exit. He kicked free from his seat, reached for a floating seat cushion, and yanked open the emergency hatch above him. The sky and the ocean fought for dominance through the narrow opening, water sloshing violently. Claire, disoriented but determined, managed to kick her way toward the same exit. In the chaos, she collided with another passenger, a young father clutching his daughter. Without hesitation, she thrust the little girl toward Mark, locking eyes with the terrified child and offering a comforting smile. "I've got her," Claire shouted above the water's roar. Together, the two survivors burst through the hatch into the night. Mark's strong arms helped Claire and the girl cling to debris. He scanned the horizon, scattered wreckage glinted in the moonlight, and distant SOS flares painted the sky red. But something far more alarming surfaced around them. Silhouettes of dark shapes sliced through the water, circling, curious, and hungry. The first shark emerged from beneath the wreckage, its dorsal fin cutting the water like a scythe. Claire froze, every muscle in her body screaming to pull away, but she couldn't abandon the child. Mark tightened his grip on the seat cushion, positioning himself between the little girl and the predator. With deliberate calm, he tapped the creature's nose with a piece of sharp metal debris. The shark recoiled, then vanished into the depths, only to be replaced by another. Minutes stretched into agonizing eternity. Claire pressed the child close, murmuring soothing words in a trembling voice. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe. Mommy's coming." The child's sobs subsided into whimpers. Above them, the fractured cabin roof bobbed like a life raft, offering momentary shelter from the dark ocean around. Suddenly, a beam of light swept across the water. A Coast Guard cutter had arrived, its siren piercing the night. Mark's shout carried toward the crew. "Over here!" Waves rocked them, threatening to tip over the debris raft. Claire urged the father, who had managed to free himself, to help guide the child toward the rescuers. As a rescue swimmer plunged into the water, Mark pushed the little girl forward. The man hoisted her into the cutter's net basket, then turned back for his own rescue. Claire clasped Mark's hand, gratitude and fear mingling in her gaze. "Thank you for saving her." Mark nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the water's surface. He'd counted at least half a dozen shark silhouettes in the circle around them. The Coast Guard swimmer approached, kicking them gently toward the basket, but the dark shapes glided closer, drawn by ripples of blood and the splintered remains of the fuselage. Claire's heart pounded. Every instinct told her to fight, to claw and kick and scream, but she had a child to protect now, and Mark's unwavering presence gave her a sliver of hope. In that moment, the two strangers became partners in survival, bound by terror and the primal will to escape the jaws of the deep. A massive fin broke the surface mere feet from Mark's shoulder. He kicked out with all his strength, sending the shark tumbling backwards. The Coast Guard swimmer seized the opportunity, dragging Mark into the net basket. Claire followed, her legs kicking desperately until she was hoisted clear of the ocean's hungry grip. As she collapsed onto the deck of the cutter, waves lapping at its hull, the reality of what had just transpired washed over her. 15 souls had survived the initial crash, but for many, the ocean would have been their tomb. Tonight, they had been rescued by courage, quick thinking, and the thin line between life and death. Dawn's first light crept across the water, painting the sea in shades of pink and gold. The Coast Guard cutter's deck thrummed with controlled urgency as surviving passengers huddled under blankets, wrapped in shock and relief. The Pacific's chill wind tugged at hair and clothing, but no one noticed the cold. Every sense was keyed to the enormity of what had transpired. Claire Donovan sat on a metal bench, cradling the little girl in her lap. The child's wide eyes stared out at the horizon, where the first rescue helicopters dipped low, their rotors stirring the air into a frantic pulse. Claire whispered gentle reassurances, brushing damp strands of hair from the girl's forehead. "We're safe now. You're safe." Nearby, Mark Henderson leaned against the railing, scanning the surrounding sea. His uniform still bore jagged tears where metal had shredded the fuselage, proof of how close they'd come to drowning or worse. He exhaled slowly, arms crossed, as he surveyed the shattered debris field. Life vests, luggage, and pieces of seats bobbed like markers in a vast, indifferent graveyard. A young Coast Guard medic approached, offering Claire a warm cup of tea. She accepted it with trembling hands, her body finally registering exhaustion. The medic's eyes were compassionate but focused. "How's she doing?" he asked, nodding toward the child. She's okay. Just afraid. Trauma's natural. We'll get her to paramedics on shore. You should also get checked." Claire managed a small nod. As she rose, the cutter pitched gently on the swell, and she steadied herself against Mark's arm. Their eyes met, both carrying the weight of survivors who'd witnessed death ripple through the darkness. Behind them, Captain Ramirez barked orders into his radio. "Helicopter 1, coordinate pickups at the North Quadrant. Cutter 2, prepare to recover floating debris. We're not leaving until every soul is accounted for." Claire moved toward the aft deck, where other passengers clustered. Among them was the young father she'd saved, a tall man named Daniel Myers, clutching a soaked photograph of his wife, still missing. He looked at Claire, gratitude mingling with grief. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You saved my daughter's life." Claire shook her head, voice thick. "We saved each other." They fell into a companionable silence as the first rescue helicopter hovered overhead. A winch operator descended, securing a harness around Daniel and his daughter. Claire and Mark watched as they were hoisted skyward, the child's tiny hand waving before disappearing into the rotor wash. Moments later, Claire spotted a second winch being lowered. This time, it was for her. She and Mark exchanged a nod. There was no need to speak. They helped each other into the harness, two survivors bound by a night of terror, and felt themselves lifted into the brightening sky. High above the wreckage, the full magnitude of the disaster spread out below them. What had seemed an endless ocean at night was now a vast, glittering expanse dotted with twisting metal and leaking fuel slicks. The roar of the helicopter's blades almost drowned out the memory of screaming engines, but Claire refused to let it take root. She closed her eyes and breathed, focusing on the gentle rise and fall of Mark's arm around her shoulders. They were flown to San Diego's naval base, where ambulances and support teams waited. Claire stepped off the ramp first, gripping the harness as though it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Mark followed, landing lightly beside her. The medic guided them toward a triage tent, checking vitals and offering blankets. While Claire underwent a quick examination, Mark spoke with Captain Ramirez. He recounted the night's events in clear, concise terms. How he'd guided Claire and the child to the hatch, how sharks had circled, and how the Coast Guard had intervened just in time. Ramirez's eyebrow arched at the mention of sharks. "You're one hell of a SEAL," he said with respect. Mark shrugged. Gaze drifted toward Claire's tent. "I did what everyone should do, to protect the innocent." Inside the medical tent, Claire sat on an examination table as a paramedic gently swabbed her cuts and bruises. "You're remarkably steady," the paramedic noted, disinfecting a gash on Claire's forearm. "Most would be rocking back and forth at this point." Claire inhaled, trying to steady her trembling hands. "I had too much to lose." She glanced at her reflection in a stainless steel tray. Dark circles under wide eyes, hair matted to her forehead, but an unyielding spark in her gaze. "I promised her I'd keep her safe." The paramedic nodded, finishing the bandage. "That kind of resolve can carry you a long way, but promise me you'll rest." Claire managed a weary smile. "I will." As Mark rejoined her, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee he'd procured from a nearby aid station, Claire offered him one. They stood in companionable silence, sipping the bitter brew. Around them, other survivors wept, hugged, or sat numb on plastic chairs. The wind carried the distant thrum of ambulances and helicopters coming and going. Claire exhaled, voice soft. "What now?" Mark traced the rim of his cup with a gloved finger. "Now we make sure every survivor gets home. Then, we figure out how to live with what happened." He tucked a stray lock of hair behind Claire's ear, a simple gesture that spoke of shared trauma and unspoken understanding. Claire met his eyes. Gratitude and fear mingled into determination. "Together," she whispered. He offered a small, reassuring smile. "Together." The midday sun beat down on the San Diego Naval Base as Claire Donovan and Mark Henderson stepped off the final military ambulance. Their bodies were bruised, bandaged, and coated in the metallic sting of seawater and fuel. Yet, amid the haze of exhaustion, each breath they drew held a fierce gratitude. They were alive. Inside the sprawling makeshift command center, rows of desks manned by Coast Guard officers and Navy personnel, the survivors' stories were being cataloged. Some whispered in clusters, comparing nightmares of flooding aisles and impossible darkness. Others sat alone, hands clenched in prayer or tapping trembling fingers on clipboards. Mark carried his issued duffel bag, its contents replaced by a dry uniform and spare clothes. He scanned the room for Claire, spotting her near an information board listing the names of those still missing. Her marine biologist's eyes, sharp as ever, traced each row with silent determination. He approached, offering a tentative nod. "How many?" he asked, voice low. Claire pointed. 15 confirmed survivors, 23 unaccounted for." She swallowed, her throat tightening. "They're posting names and photos, hoping families recognize someone." Mark placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "They'll find them." His words carried the unshakable confidence of a former SEAL, yet his expression betrayed the weight of all those still at sea. "We'll keep looking, and when they bring them in, we'll welcome them home." A young lieutenant interrupted, handing each of them a folder. "These are your debrief orders," he said crisply.
Medical follow-ups, counseling information, and, should you choose, press interviews. His tone flicked toward Claire, recognizing her as the story's unlikely heroine. Claire exchanged a glance with Mark. "Press?" she echoed quietly. "We're giving the media a controlled statement," the lieutenant explained. "Your account of the rescue is vital. It'll help people understand what went wrong and how we can prevent it next time." The gravity of publicity settled on Claire like a second uniform. She opened the folder, pulling out a schedule. Camera crews at 1600 hours, taped interview at 1800 hours. She looked up at Mark, concern flashing across her face. He offered a reassuring smile. "We'll handle it." As they navigated toward the medical tent for a final check, memories of the ocean's darkness echoed in Claire's mind. The frigid shock of cooled water, the rasp of her own breath, the gleam of stainless steel teeth beneath the waves. But she also recalled the glowing SOS flares, the steady hand guiding the child, and the way Mark's calm voice had cut through the terror. Inside the tent, a compassionate Navy doctor ran scans and vitals. Claire watched through a mesh curtain as Mark received stitches for a deep gash on his forearm. She closed her eyes, silently thanking the antics of fate that had placed them together on Flight 452. "Ready for the cameras?" a nurse asked her gently, dabbing at a bruise forming on Claire's cheek. Claire inhaled, steadying herself. "Yes," she replied softly. "For them." Later that afternoon, under bright lights and the hum of generators, Claire and Mark stood shoulder to shoulder before a semicircle of journalists. Microphones from national networks and international outlets formed a jagged crown at their feet. Reporters jotted notes, cameras rolled, and a hush fell as Claire cleared her throat. She spoke first, her measured tone revealing the precision of a scientist. On July 15th, at approximately 23:48 Pacific Standard Time, Flight 452 experienced a catastrophic double-engine failure over the Pacific Ocean. The crew declared an emergency and attempted a controlled ditching. Despite their training, the aircraft broke apart on impact and the cabin flooded within minutes. A reporter's voice cut in. "Ms. Donovan, how did you manage to stay calm and protect that child?" Claire glanced at Mark, who offered a subtle nod of encouragement. She inhaled, then looked directly into the camera. "My training as a marine biologist has taught me respect for the ocean's power. But that night, it was a father's love and a fellow survivor's courage that guided me. When faced with mortal danger, we draw on every reserve of strength and compassion we have." Mark took over smoothly. "As a former Navy SEAL, my instinct was to lead and protect, but I wasn't working alone. Claire's quick thinking and the father's selflessness saved that little girl's life. This was a team effort, an example of humanity at its finest in the darkest hour." Flashes of bulbs lit the scene as reporters scribbled furiously. One asked about the sharks, another inquired about safety reforms. Each question was met with careful honesty. When the release ended, media personnel swarmed with follow-up queries, but Claire and Mark departed swiftly, escorted by military aides. Outside, as helicopters thumped overhead and engines idled, Claire exhaled the tension knotted in her chest. "That was surreal," she whispered. Mark nodded, watching the survivors' tents lining the perimeter. "But necessary. Their stories deserve to be heard." Claire allowed herself a tired smile. "And we owe it to the families still waiting." They walked in companionable silence toward the reunification area, where loved ones of survivors waited, hope and dread flickering in their eyes. Claire braced herself. Soon she would face the relief and heartbreak of those whose lives had pivoted on the edge of an abyss. The sun was setting as Claire Donovan and Mark Henderson approached the reunification area, an open tarmac lined with folding chairs and clusters of anxious relatives. The air was heavy with tension, hope and dread intermingling like salt and oil. A mother clutched a bouquet of daisies, tears glinting on her cheeks. A teenage son shifted from foot to foot, eyes scanning every newcomer. Claire's heart constricted at each hopeful glance. She gripped Mark's arm as they stepped beneath the fluttering banners that read, "Welcome home." Nearby, military escorts guided survivors toward waiting ambulances and crowd control barriers. The hum of whispered prayers rose to a chorus as the first group emerged from the makeshift medical tents. A young woman strode forward, pale, drenched, but alive. Her father, pacing the perimeter, spotted her and broke into a sprint. He collided with her in a fierce embrace, sobbing into her wet hair.
Claire looked away, tears threatening her own composure.
She swallowed hard, reminding herself of all the lives still missing. Their attention was drawn to a pair of figures walking slowly, hand in hand, toward the barriers. The little girl Claire had protected was wrapped in a thermal blanket, her eyes wide but alert. Daniel Myers stood beside her, face gray with exhaustion and relief. As they approached, the crowd parted. Parents and siblings alike held their breath. Daniel knelt to meet his daughter's gaze. "Mommy!" the girl cried, fingers reaching. A woman burst through the barrier, a small, trembling frame and a bright red jacket, and flung herself into Daniel's arms. Their tears mingled, hollow cheeks pressed together, as daughter and mother joined in a trembling, joyful circle. Claire stepped back, letting the scene unfold. Next to her, Mark rested a hand on her shoulder. "They're safe," he said softly. "You did that." Claire exhaled, shoulders sagging. "We did it." They continued along the line of survivors emerging into daylight, each greeted with elation or heartbreak. A silent embrace here, a wail of grief there. Claire recognized faces from the night before. The elderly couple who had shared a row with her, holding hands until the moment the cabin flooded, the young engineer who'd kicked open an exit hatch, the nurse who stayed behind to help others before finally climbing to safety. Mark watched Claire's face as she exchanged nods and murmured words of comfort. He remembered the fear in her eyes, how she'd swallowed it and acted. In her eyes now was gratitude, and something more, a fierce advocacy for those still lost. At the far end of the tarmac, a group of Coast Guard officers fanned out around a collection of blankets and plastic-wrapped packages. A stretcher lay empty, a silent testament to those who hadn't made it. Claire and Mark paused, paying their respects in a moment of hushed reverence. "Not everyone had a storybook ending," Claire murmured. Mark nodded, voice low. "We have to honor them too." Claire's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sky glowed in bands of orange and violet. Memories washed over her, the snap of metal, the betrayal of gravity, the glint of a shark's eye in the moonlit water. But those images were balanced by others, the flare's red bloom against the black sea, the steadying pressure of Mark's hand, the cry of the little girl as she saw her mother. She turned to Mark, voice firm. "We need to help their families understand what happened. People deserve the truth."
He placed his hand over her heart. "And you will be the one to tell it." The crowd began to dissipate as ambulances departed and survivors climbed into waiting vehicles. Claire noticed the nurse who'd stayed behind, guiding an elderly woman into an ambulance with a gentle smile. She caught Claire's eye and offered a nod of solidarity, a silent acknowledgement of shared loss and hope. As the tarmac emptied, Claire and Mark found themselves alone under the fluttering "Welcome Home" banner. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of diesel and salt spray. Claire closed her eyes, embracing the cool breeze like a benediction. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver pendant, an emblem of a dolphin, winged and leaping. He held it out to Claire. "I picked this up in the cabin. It was a gift for the girl. I thought you should have it." Claire accepted the pendant, pressing it to her lips. "Thank you." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I'll give it to her." He smiled, a quiet warmth shining in his eyes. "It belongs to her, and to everyone who fought to keep her alive." They stood together as the final rays of sunlight slipped below the horizon, the world quiet in the aftermath of chaos. In that lingering twilight, survivor and protector shared a moment of profound connection. Two souls bound by terror, courage, and the will to live. Claire slipped the pendant into her palm and looked at Mark. "Where do we go from here?" He exhaled, shoulders relaxing. "We rebuild, and we remember." She nodded, a fierce determination settling in her chest. "Together." As they walked away from the tarmac, leaving behind the echoes of sirens and sobs, they carried with them the stories of Flight 452, stories of loss, of heroism, and of the fragile line between life and death. And in that shared journey, they discovered the strength of the human spirit to endure, to love, and to keep shining light into the darkest depths. Night had fallen again by the time Claire Donovan returned to her modest beachfront cottage, the waves lapping in gentle rhythm against the shore. She unlocked the door and flicked on a single lamp, its soft glow illuminating the carefully organized specimens in microscopes that defined her life as a marine biologist. Tonight, though, the familiar comforts felt distant. Her mind was still adrift in the Pacific, tangled in memories of metal shards and shark silhouettes.
After a moment's hesitation, Claire strode to her desk and opened her laptop. An email inbox flooded with messages greeted her, expressions of gratitude from strangers, interview requests, and a note from the Coast Guard's CID, Casualty Investigation Division, requesting her cooperation in their inquiry. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. There was work to be done, both scientific and personal. She typed a brief reply to the CID. I am available to review flight data and passenger testimonies. Please send any preliminary reports. Dr. Claire Donovan. With that settled, Claire closed her laptop and stood by the window, gazing at the dark silhouette of the ocean beyond. In the moonlight, the water seemed serene and indifferent, a stark contrast to the violence of Flight 452's descent. She placed a hand over her heart, recalling the drowning hiss of water, the flickering red of the SOS flares, and the way Mark Henderson's steady grip had pulled her upward. Determined to reclaim some sense of control, she changed into swim shorts and a rash guard, then slipped outside barefoot onto the cool sand. The Pacific breeze carried salt and the promise of anonymity under the night sky. She waded into the lapping surf, letting the water envelop her legs. Each step felt like a pilgrimage. She was returning to the place of her greatest terror, hoping to exorcise its grip. When the water reached her waist, Claire dipped beneath the surface. She emerged a moment later, gasping as cool waves crashed around her shoulders. She closed her eyes, letting the salt sting her eyelids. Every sense sharpened. The distant call of a gull, the phosphorescent glow of plankton swirling around her calves, and the steady cadence of her own heartbeat. She kicked out, treading water, and tested her equipment. A waterproof flashlight, a dive knife strapped to her thigh, and an emergency whistle. It was trivial. She wasn't planning a deep dive tonight, but the ritual grounded her. The ocean was no longer an enemy. It was the habitat she'd devoted her life to understanding. Claire swam out until the cottage lights on the shore were mere pinpricks. There she floated on her back, arms splayed wide, staring up at the stars. She thought of the fractured fuselage, now resting in sections on the seabed, and of the bodies still waiting to be recovered. A wave of grief washed through her, but she let it pass. Grief, she reminded herself, was a tribute to what was lost, and a testament to what remained. Back on shore, Claire wrapped herself in a towel and walked slowly toward her cottage. Inside, she switched on the lamp over her specimen table, revealing jars filled with preserved fish, coral fragments, and small invertebrates. She traced the label on a jar of sea star larvae, an organism known for its regenerative powers, a symbol, perhaps, of her own need to heal. Her phone buzzed, a message from Mark Henderson. Want company? Could use a dive buddy. Mark. Claire allowed herself a small, grateful smile. She typed back, "Be there in 20. Bring coffee." 20 minutes later, Mark appeared, dark-haired and lean in a wetsuit, 2 steaming cups in hand. He offered her one, and their fingers brushed. "Thanks," she said softly. They stepped outside again, This time not as two isolated survivors, but as comrades united by shared trauma and shared purpose. Mark handed Claire her flashlight and adjusted his own gear. "The water's calm," he noted, glancing at the moonlit swells. "Good night for a swim." Claire nodded, and to talk. They waded out together into the surf. As they moved beyond their limits of comfort, Claire found her voice. "I've been thinking about the sharks," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "How those silhouettes nearly ended us." Mark exhaled. "I've replayed it over and over. If I'd hesitated for 1 second," he shook his head. "But you were right there, steady, focused. You saved that child as much as I did." Claire let the words settle between them. "I want to help with the investigation," she confessed, "to understand exactly what happened and why." He dipped beneath a swell and resurfaced beside her. "I've been talking to some SEAL buddies. We can help review the flight path, engine telemetry. If there was negligence or a design flaw, we'll find it." Claire's heart quickened. Even if it means taking on powerful airlines and manufacturers? Mark's gaze was unwavering, especially then. They swam in silence for a few strokes, letting the repetition soothe their minds. Then Claire pointed toward the distant glow of San Diego's lights. "When this is over, I'd like to return here," she said quietly. "To study the wreck, to honor those who didn't make it." Mark nodded. "And I'll be here to make sure you get there, and back." Under the moon's pale light, they tread water, two souls floating between past terror and future resolve, partners in the fight for truth, justice, and the promise of renewal beneath the waves.
Dawn tinted the sky rose and lavender as Claire Donovan and Mark Henderson arrived at the San Diego Naval Shipyard. The base's harbor was quiet, save for the soft slap of boat hulls against the dock and the distant cry of seagulls. A large research barge loomed at the far pier, its deck thronged with sonar technicians, deep-sea submersible pilots, and naval engineers. Today, they would descend to the wreck of Flight 452. Claire's heart fluttered with anticipation and dread. She pulled on her dry suit and checked her equipment. A high-definition underwater camera tethered to the submersible, a data logger for capturing pressure readings, and a small personal kit, her dive knife, compass, and notebook. Across the deck, Mark secured his own harness, loading specialized tools salvaged from SEAL salvage operations, a magnetic grapnel, underwater cutting torch, and communications link. A Navy lieutenant briefed the team over the barge's PA system. "Submersible Trident 1 will dive to 3,500 feet. We expect visibility of 10 to 15 meters in the thermocline. Estimated descent time is 20 minutes, with 2 hours on station. All crew, secure your positions and run final checks." Claire exchanged a determined look with Mark. Together, they stepped into the yellow cockpit of Trident 1, their boots echoing on the steel floor. Inside, the cramped cabin was bathed in the pale glow of instrument panels. Claire strapped into the co-pilot seat, pressing her palms to the cold glass viewport. The hatches snapped shut, and with a shudder, the submersible slid off the barge's cradle. Below, the ocean yawned, an infinite corridor of indigo stretching to the abyssal plain. Clara's pulse quickened as Trident 1 began its slow descent, floodlights cutting arcs through the gloom. 20 minutes later, the first outline of the fuselage appeared, a ghostly silhouette lying on the seabed like a fallen leviathan. The fractured tail section sat 50 feet away from the nose, connected only by a twisted ribbon of wing spar. Clouds of silt billowed with every current, but careful maneuvering allowed Claire to make out seat frames, luggage compartments, and the black shapes of life vests. She pointed to the starboard engine inlet, which was sheared jaggedly. She murmured into the comms mic, "Look at the deformation here. The metal is bent inward, suggesting a downward angle on impact. It struck the water almost nose first." On the surface, engineers nodded at her data feed. Below, Claire scanned the surrounding area. "Deploy the grab sample arm," she instructed. The mechanical claw extended, snagging a piece of cabin panel engraved with a passenger's nameplate. Claire's gloved fingers trembled as she watched the artifact secure. Mark guided the submersible closer to the port wing. "Pressure readings are stable," he reported. Then, almost imperceptibly, the lights caught movement in the darkness. A slender body drifted near the debris field, an enormous Pacific whiteside dolphin skeleton, long since picked clean by scavengers. Its presence underscored the finality of deep-sea tragedy. Claire swallowed, reminding herself of her mission to bear witness and learn. She angled the camera toward a cluster of seat cushions strewn across the sand. "This must be where survivors found flotation," she whispered. "Look at the nacelle fragments here. Could these have created a temporary barrier against the current?" They spent the next hour meticulously documenting the wreck, gathering samples of twisted metal, hydraulic fluid residue, and plume patterns in the sediment. Claire's scientific mind raced with questions about structural failure, hydraulic dynamics, and how a double-engine flameout could produce such catastrophic fragmentation. As their clock ticked toward 2 hours, the submersible's hatch indicator began blinking red. It was time to ascend. Trident 1 rose steadily, the wreck receding into the deep blue as Claire reviewed the footage on her wrist monitor. She exhaled, feeling the familiar burn of decompression protocols. Back on deck, Claire and Mark emerged blinking into sunlight. Engineers hustled over, already transferring recovered artifacts into sealed containers. Claire ran through her notes with rapid excitement. The tail cone's fracture pattern suggests a secondary explosion, possibly from trapped fuel vapors. And the wing's bending radius indicates impact at over 150 knots. Mark nodded appreciatively. "This will be crucial for the CID. If we can show that a design flaw contributed to the breakup, it could save lives in the future." Claire gazed out at the rippling harbor. Beneath its placid surface lay the remains of Flight 452, evidence of both human failure and resilience. She thought of the sailors who would retrieve the victims' remains, giving families the closure they deserved, and of the survivors on shore, forever linked by that night. She placed a hand on Mark's.
"Thank you for bringing me back down there." He smiled gently. "We're partners in this, remember? I'll follow you to the ends of the earth." Claire nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "Then let's make sure Flight 452's story changes the world for the better." As the sun climbed higher, warming the deck and drying their suits, Claire felt a sense of purpose settling in her bones. The abyss had revealed its secrets, but the real work, analysis, advocacy, and healing, had only just begun. Weeks had passed since the Trident 1 dive, but the echo of Flight 452's tragedy continued to reverberate through Claire Donovan's life. Her beachfront cottage, once a sanctuary of research and quiet reflection, had become a hub of scientific collaboration and media requests. Stacks of documents and technical schematics covered her desk. Video screens looped sonar footage, engine diagrams, and archived flight data. This morning, Claire made her way to the California State University Auditorium, where the Aviation Safety Symposium was in full swing. Aviation engineers, regulatory officials from the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, and airline representatives filled the rows. At the front, a banner proclaimed, "Learning from Loss, Preventing Future Ditchings." Claire carried a slim binder of her latest findings: fracture analyses, impact angle measurements, and deep-sea pressure data. She spotted Mark Henderson near the registration table, his crisp Navy uniform replaced by civilian attire, dark slacks, and a polo shirt bearing the SEAL insignia. He gave her a reassuring nod. "Are you ready?" he asked, voice low. "I have to be. Too much is riding on this." Their session began with an FAA official outlining current ditching protocols and statistics. Less than 0.1% of commercial flights end in water landings.
but survival rates plummeted when structural failure occurred on impact. Frequent flyer executives nodded politely. Insurance adjusters tapped away on tablets. As the official concluded, the moderator introduced Claire. She stepped to the lectern, slide remote in hand. The overhead lights dimmed, and the first slide illuminated the screen. An image of Flight 452's starboard engine fractured and bent inward. A hush fell on the audience. "Good morning," she began, voice clear and measured. "I'd like to share the data we recovered from the wreck site of Flight 452, which I believe highlights critical design vulnerabilities in current narrow-body aircraft engines when ditching at high vertical speed." She advanced to the next slide, a high-resolution capture of metal stress lines beneath the fan case. "As you can see," she continued, "this deformation indicates that upon water impact, the fan case failed before the nacelle structure could absorb sufficient energy. The result, uncontrolled fragmentation of the engine assembly and wing spar, compromising the aircraft's integrity and resulting in rapid fuselage breach." Hands shot up. An airline safety director asked about data reliability. Claire responded by detailing the Trident 1's calibration logs and cross-referencing with CAD models provided by the manufacturer under subpoena. She cited pressure readings, 4,800 psi, and temperature differentials that matched the flight's last engine telemetry points. A regulatory engineer challenged her assumptions. "Dr. Donovan, even if we accept these failure modes, what practical modifications can be implemented without grounding fleets?" Claire advanced to a schematic overlay. "We propose reinforced fan case linings using composite ceramic matrix materials, which can withstand higher shear loads without significant weight penalty. Additionally, integrating sacrificial energy-absorbing struts within the nacelle pylon could mitigate the transmission of impact forces into the wing root." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Airline representatives exchanged glances. Claire pressed on, shifting to her final slide, a dual bar chart showing projected improvement in ditching survivability from 65% to over 90% with her recommended modifications. "Implementing these changes," she concluded, "will not only save lives in rare ditching events, but also enhance overall structural resilience in accident scenarios." The symposium erupted into applause. Claire inhaled, relief flooding through her. As the moderator thanked her, officials from the FAA and two major engine manufacturers rose to approach the lectern. She gripped Mark's hand briefly before stepping down. Outside the auditorium, cameras flashed as journalists surrounded Claire. Reporters from aviation magazines and network news clamored for soundbites, eager to highlight a breakthrough in passenger safety. Claire navigated the questions with calm professionalism, always circling back to her core message: engineering change to honor the lives lost on Flight 452. Later, in a small side room, Claire met with FAA representatives. A senior engineer slid a thick dossier across the table. "Your data has prompted an expedited review," he said. "Within 60 days, you'll join a task force to draft updated certification requirements. We appreciate your collaboration." Claire exhaled. "Thank you. This means more than you know." As she left the symposium, with Mark by her side, she felt the first real momentum in turning tragedy into reform. The warm afternoon sun felt different, energizing, alive with possibility. Yet, she also carried the weight of memory. The faces of the 23 still unaccounted for, the cramped cabin flooding, the hungry circling sharks. That evening, back at her cottage, Claire and Mark reviewed the FAA's draft timeline. They toasted with herbal tea beside the specimen table. Mark, ever the protector, placed a comforting arm around her shoulder. "You've done more than anyone could ask," he said softly. "You're giving Flight 452 a legacy of safety." Claire looked at the dolphin skeleton on her shelf, a memento from the Trident 1 dive. She traced its curved beak with her fingertip. "I started this journey to understand the ocean's power," she whispered. "Now I'm learning to harness it for change." Mark kissed her forehead. and I'll be here to help you steer the course." They sat together in the glow of the desk lamp, the gentle hum of the waves outside, a rhythm of continuity and renewal. As the night deepened, Claire opened her notebook and began outlining the next steps: detailed engineering studies, regulatory liaison meetings, and an outreach program for aviation schools. In that quiet, purposeful moment, she felt the true depth of her transformation, from survivor to advocate, from witness to agent of progress. And as the keys clicked beneath her pen, she knew that Flight 452's story, born in terror and loss, would end in hope and change. A week later, Claire Donovan stood before the polished mahogany doors of the Flight 452 Memorial Hall, the gentle hum of mourners and supporters filtering through the stained glass windows. Inside, framed photographs of the 23 unaccounted-for passengers lined the marble walls, smiling faces frozen in time, each one a life cut tragically short.
Tonight was the first anniversary vigil, a solemn gathering of families, survivors, and advocates united by loss and hope. Claire's chest tightened as she passed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Rows of white folding chairs faced a dais draped in navy and white bunting. On a small table at center stage rested a single lit candle, flickering above a ledger filled with personal remembrances. Beside it stood a clear acrylic box containing the silver dolphin pendant she had carried out of the Pacific, an emblem now consecrated in tribute to all who had perished. She spotted Mark Henderson near the back, dressed in a dark suit with a muted SEAL insignia pin. He offered her a reassuring nod, then slipped away to greet the families as they arrived, a mother clutching a bouquet of white lilies, a young man in fatigues carrying the photo of his fiancée, the elderly couple who'd survived but lost their daughter. Claire felt tears prick her eyes at each encounter, each story a reminder of her duty to bear witness and champion change. Soft piano music filled the hall as the ceremony began. A Coast Guard chaplain stepped forward, voice low but clear. "We gather this evening to honor the souls of Flight 452, those whose flight ended in the depths and those whose lives were forever altered on the surface. Let us remember them with love, and let their legacy guide us towards safer skies." Each attendee was invited to step forward, light a candle, and place a page from the ledger into the acrylic box. One by one, Claire watched relatives kneel, a widow tracing her lost husband's name, a teenage nephew pressing a handprint of bright blue ink onto the page, a mother adding a pressed flower from her son's favorite garden. When it was her turn, Claire approached the table, heart pounding. She knelt, closing her eyes as tears spilled down her cheeks. Gently, she removed the dolphin pendant from its box and set it atop the ledger. In her mind's eye, she saw the pitch-black water, the distant red glow of flares, and the sudden flash of shark fins carving the waves. She placed her hand on the pendant, whispering, "For them, always." Then she sealed her remembrance into the acrylic box and rose, the echo of silence stretching across the hall. When the last candle was lit, the chaplain invited everyone to stand. "May the courage of survivors inspire us. May the research and reforms born from this tragedy spare future generations of pain. And may we carry their memories forward in our hearts and in every flight that takes to the sky." A moment of hushed reflection followed. Then the room filled with soft sobs and stifled breaths. Claire felt Mark's arm wrap around her shoulders. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. Around them, families embraced. Survivors exchanged stories of nightmarish flooding and impossible bravery, and engineers whispered about the next steps in redesigning safety systems. After the ceremony, guests drifted into the lobby, where a simple reception awaited. Cups of tea, platters of cookies, and a memory wall covered in Polaroid snapshots. Claire lingered by a photograph of her, taken the day after the crash, eyes haunted but resolute. She traced the image with her fingertip, recalling the moment Mark had helped her to shore, drenched and trembling. Suddenly, Daniel Myers appeared, clutching his daughter's small hand. His expression was one of gentle gratitude as he reached toward Claire. "Dr. Donovan, thank you for giving our family a future." Claire swallowed, the motion breaking her voice. "You gave me purpose." She knelt to hand the girl a small polished shell, a gift she'd collected from the wreck site. "For you," she whispered. The child's eyes widened as she cradled the gift. Daniel placed a hand on Claire's arm. "We'll never forget." Claire nodded, tears shining. "Neither will I." As the hall emptied, Claire found a quiet corner, then opened her notebook. She sketched the pendant, the ledger box, and the faces she'd seen tonight. In the margin, she wrote one word: "Remember." Below it, she began jotting ideas for a traveling exhibit, an interactive display combining wreckage fragments, survivor testimonies, and safety prototypes. Mark joined her, folding her arm in his. "Your next project?" he asked, nodding at her notebook. Claire smiled through tears. "To teach the world to remember, and to never fly blind again." He kissed her temple. "I'll help you build it." Together they stepped out into the cool night air. Above them, the stars shone bright, a silent audience to the promise being forged below, that through remembrance, action would follow, and Flight 452's legacy would guide every soul who dared to look fear in the face and choose to soar. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board office, Capitol's Rayburn House office building, illuminating the semicircle of seats and lectern at the front of room 2142. Claire Donovan and Mark Henderson settled into adjacent chairs near the witness table, their folders filled with technical reports, dive logs, and safety proposals stacked neatly before them. Today's agenda: a congressional hearing on aviation safety reform in the wake of Flight 452. Claire smoothed her navy blazer, heart pounding. Across the aisle, representatives of major airlines and engine manufacturers whispered among themselves. A cluster of journalists hovered behind a velvet rope, cameras and recorders poised. The proceedings would be televised live, and millions of Americans would hear her speak. The gavel fell. Chairwoman Gonzalez, her silver hair pulled back into a severe bun, called the hearing to order. "We convene today to examine critical aircraft design vulnerabilities and propose legislative remedies to enhance passenger safety during ditching scenarios," she intoned. "Our first witnesses are Dr. Claire Donovan, marine scientist and wreck site investigator, and Mr. Mark Henderson, former Navy SEAL and Flight 452 survivor." Claire rose, each step weighted by the memories she carried. She approached the lectern, adjusted the microphone, and glanced at the audience. Families of victims, aviation experts, government officials. She inhaled deeply. "Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee," she began, voice steady but urgent. "On July 15, 2024, Flight 452's catastrophic double-engine failure and subsequent structural breakup claimed 23 lives and traumatized 15 survivors. My team's deep-sea investigation revealed that the fan cases fractured under impact forces, causing engine debris to penetrate the fuselage and compromise flotation integrity." She clicked to slide 1, a high-resolution image of a fractured engine blade embedded in fuselage panel. "These findings demonstrate a systemic design flaw. Without reinforced fan case linings and sacrificial energy-absorbing pylons, ditching survivability remains unnecessarily low. I urge this committee to mandate updated certification requirements for all commercial engine manufacturers within 12 months. Murmurs rippled through the room as Claire handed printed copies of her report to each committee member.
She offered technical details on material stress tolerances, computed risk reduction percentages, and cost-benefit projections, demonstrating that the proposed upgrades would add fewer than 2 pounds per engine while increasing ditching survivability by over 25%. Next, Mark Henderson took the stand. His appearance, solid, resolute, animated the room in a different way. He recounted the night of the crash, the deafening impact, the rush of freezing water, the circling sharks, and the desperate bid to protect a child. His first-hand account underscored the human stakes behind the technical data. "I lost friends that night," he said, voice low but firm. "I still hear the crack of metal and feel the cold water closing over me. If this committee acts, no family should have to endure this pain again." A congressman from the Transportation Subcommittee raised his hand. "Mr. Henderson, can you speak to the training and resources needed for Coast Guard rescue operations in similar scenarios?" Mark nodded. "Absolutely. While improved aircraft design is paramount, we also require enhanced coordination protocols and increased funding for coastal rescue units. Faster response times and specialized dive gear can mean the difference between life and death." The hearing stretched into 3 hours of questioning. Airline lobbyists pressed on economic impacts and technical feasibility. FAA officials reiterated current certification cycles. Survivors' family members shared emotional testimony about loved ones lost. Through it all, Claire and Mark answered with clarity, compassion, and unshakable conviction. Finally, Chairwoman Gonzalez leaned forward, gaze incisive. "Dr. Donovan, Mr. Henderson, thank you for your testimony. This committee will draft legislation to address these issues. We will invite you to consult on the bill's language and oversee its implementation." As the gavel fell, reporters surged toward the witness table. Television anchors waited to broadcast sound bites. Claire and Mark were whisked into a small conference room for post-hearing debriefs. A legislative aide extended a hand to Claire, holding a draft timeline. Markup scheduled in 6 weeks, full vote in 9 months. Claire exhaled, relief mingling with resolve. "We did it," she whispered to Mark. He clasped her hand, pride and affection in his eyes. Together. Outside the Capitol, a freshwater breeze carried the hopeful buzz of change. Families of Flight 452's victims embraced survivors on the marble steps. The nation's guardrails for safety were about to be raised thanks to the courage of a scientist and a soldier who refused to let tragedy claim more lives. Later that afternoon, Claire and Mark returned to her cottage by the sea. The waves glittered in the sunset, a reminder of both terror and wonder. Claire opened her notebook and wrote over "Trials of Truth," now crossed out, and beneath it wrote "Triumph of Reform." And as the tide rolled in, she knew their work would endure, ensuring that when future aircraft met the sea, hope would ride on wings stronger than tragedy. The morning sun filtered through the pines lining Dr. Claire Donovan's coastal property, illuminating the last rose bushes she had planted in memory of Flight 452's victims. Today marked the unveiling of the Aviation Safety and Ocean Science Pavilion, a joint initiative she and Mark Henderson had championed with the FAA, Coast Guard, and California State University. The pavilion would house interactive exhibits on ditching dynamics, shark behavior, and deep-sea wreck investigation, alongside classrooms for training rescue personnel. Claire stood beside the ribbon, heart beating with a mixture of pride and quiet solemnity. Families of the lost, mothers in soft scarves, fathers in crisp blazers, gathered on the paved plaza.
Survivors, clad in navy blazers and SEAL pins, exchanged nods with scientists and engineers in white lab coats. A Marine band played a gentle dirge as the crowd fell silent. Mark stepped forward, shears in hand, his uniform replaced by a tailored suit that still hinted at his military bearing. "Today," he began, voice resonant, "we honor those who perished on Flight 452 by forging tools and knowledge to protect future flyers. This pavilion stands as a testament to human resilience, our capacity to learn from tragedy and to harness science, courage, and compassion in equal measure." Claire joined him at the podium, glancing at the polished stone engraved with the names of the 23 souls they'd lost. "This facility embodies a promise," she said, sweeping her hand toward the gleaming steel and glass structure. "A promise that we will never forget, that we will study, innovate, and train so that when an aircraft meets the sea, hope will ride on wings stronger than tragedy." The ribbon fell, and applause rippled through the plaza.
Children in orange Coast Guard life vests rushed forward to explore the outdoor flume, where models demonstrated how flotation devices and cabin barriers could be optimized. Inside, panels revealed close-up footage of the fractured engine, annotated by Claire's research team. A sonar station allowed visitors to pilot Trident 1 in a virtual dive, mapping a digital wreck in the blue abyss. Throughout the day, Claire guided small groups of school children, explaining how ocean currents shaped debris fields and why understanding shark behavior mattered even in rescue scenarios. Mark led hands-on seminars at the adjacent drill tower, teaching Coast Guard cadets how to rig rescue lines over open water, share flotation, and ward off inquisitive predators until professional swimmers arrived. In the afternoon, they were joined by FAA officials and representatives from 2 major engine manufacturers. A formal signing ceremony took place in the pavilion's atrium, an agreement to revise engine certification standards within 18 months, incorporating Claire's composite ceramic fan case liners and sacrificial pylon absorbers. Executives and regulators signed in alternating order, while families watched from ushered benches, their faces bright with tentative hope. As the crowd dispersed into evening's golden light, Claire and Mark remained behind to lock up the facility. They walked through the silent galleries, pausing at each exhibit. At the display of personal artifacts, thermal blanket fragments, handwritten letters from survivors, Claire felt the weight of memory settle once more. "I never imagined I'd return here," she whispered, tracing a small, water-stained drawing of a dolphin sketched by the little girl whose life they'd saved. The sketch hung near the artifact case alongside the silver pendant. Mark slipped an arm around her shoulders. "He made this possible," he said. "You turned your fear into action, your grief into change." Claire met his gaze, gratitude shining in her eyes. "And you stood beside me every step of the way." He kissed her temple. "Always." Later that night, in her study overlooking the moonlit ocean, Claire opened a letter from the Coast Guard CID. Their final report, drawing on her field data and Mark's testimony, concluded that a combination of engine design flaws, training gaps, and response delays had compounded Flight 452's tragedy. The report recommended sweeping reforms that would soon become law. She placed the letter on her desk, alongside the last log entry from Trident 1's dive. Underneath lay a pressed sea star from her specimen collection, its regenerative arms symbolizing renewal. Claire leaned back in her chair, hands clasped behind her head as she regarded the stars. 10 chapters had carried her from terror's grip through the depths of the sea to the halls of power and back again. Now she faced a horizon unbound by fear. Tomorrow, she would speak at an international conference in London. Next week, she would co-author a children's book on ocean safety. Next month, plan a deep-sea expedition to survey other historic wrecks. Each path extended from Flight 452's legacy, a winding trail that combines science, advocacy, and the human heart. Claire closed her eyes, allowing the gentle rush of waves to lull her mind. Somewhere in the deep, the fuselage lay broken but remembered, its story giving rise to knowledge and compassion. And on the surface, a new generation of rescuers, engineers, and dreamers would carry that story forward. She reached for her pen and wrote 2 words at the top of a fresh notebook page: Dawn Rises. Beneath them, she began the outline for Chapter 11, an ongoing narrative of hope, action, and the sea's eternal call. Claire Donovan awoke before dawn, the soft pre-dawn glow filtering through her cottage curtains. A folded newspaper lay on the bedside table, its headline announcing her forthcoming keynote at the International Maritime Safety Forum in London. Beside it, a mug of coffee steamed, and a gravimetric barometer ticked quietly, a reminder of weather patterns she would soon study for her next deep-sea mission. She rose and dressed quickly, pulling on a navy fleece embroidered with the pavilion's logo. Stepping onto the back deck, she inhaled the salty breeze, watching breakers roll in beneath a sky so pale it felt like a promise. The ocean had been both her crucible and her canvas. Each chapter in Flight 452's story had drawn her deeper into its mysteries. Now she was poised to venture farther, to translate her lessons into global standards and scientific discovery. Inside, her desk was cleared except for 2 items: Trident 1's last log and a sheaf of letters from families who had lost loved ones. She picked up one letter, delicate with tears at the edges, from a mother whose son's seatbelt buckle fragment had been recovered and etched with his initials.
At the bottom, she had written, "We will carry his legacy forward." That promise had galvanized her work ever since. A knock on the doorframe announced Mark Henderson, fresh from his own morning training run along the beach. He carried 2 travel coffee tumblers and wore a grin edged with anticipation. "London prep meeting at 0800, he reminded her, flipping his phone screen toward her. "Then we fly out in the evening. Your speech is tomorrow morning." Claire accepted the coffee and met his eyes. "I've reviewed the outline," she said, voice soft but resolute. "But I want to emphasize the link between ocean science and aviation safety. We can't silo disciplines anymore." He nodded, setting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You'll be brilliant, and I'll back you up during Q&A." Their planning meeting convened in the pavilion's conference room. A video link projected faces from London's Royal Society, a panel of engineers, oceanographers, and policymakers. Claire navigated seamlessly through her slides, weaving together data on impact force modeling with footage of marine currents swirling around the fuselage. She proposed an international task force, cross-disciplinary teams jointly funded by aviation regulators and marine research grants. As questions streamed in from England, Claire and Mark fielded them in tandem, her technical acumen complemented by his operational insights. By the meeting's close, the panel unanimously endorsed their proposal, offering to host the inaugural workshop later that year in Portsmouth. Claire let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Back in her cottage, she and Mark celebrated with a quiet dinner on the porch. Lanterns cast warm pools of light over bowls of fresh-caught fish and seasonal vegetables. Claire savored the meal, mindful of how the ocean provided both peril and sustenance. She reached across the table, brushing her fingers against Mark's. "We're making a real difference," she said. He smiled, eyes reflecting the dancing lantern glow. Flight 452 survivors and victims alike would be proud.
After dinner, Claire retreated to her study to prepare for departure. She packed her presentation notes, a copy of the International Safety Report, and a small memento, the silver dolphin pendant, now polished and affixed to a lanyard. It was more than jewelry. It was a symbol of lives saved and lessons learned. Before closing her suitcase, she paused at the window, looking out at the inky ocean.
Somewhere beneath that surface lay the broken airframe, home to relics and answers yet to be found. Her work would continue, mapping currents, refining material simulations, advocating for multidisciplinary collaboration. Each expedition she embarked upon would deepen collective understanding and, she hoped, save lives. Mark joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Claire nodded, leaning into his embrace. Beyond ready. They left for the airport under a canopy of stars, carrying with them the weight of memory and the promise of progress. The engine's roar signaled not just departure, but the next leg in a journey that transcended any single crash or rescue. As the plane climbed toward a sky still veiled in pre-dawn dusk warm, Claire gazed out the window. The world below grew smaller. Patches of ocean lit by moonlight, coastlines traced in silvery ribbon. In that moment, she reflected on the path that had carried her from the deck of a cutting-edge research barge to these heights. Flight 452's legacy was no longer confined to tragedy. It had rippled across fields and borders, forging new alliances and opportunities. Tomorrow, she would speak of collaboration between aviators and oceanographers, of design standards shaped by data collected a mile beneath the waves. She would stand before an international audience and advocate for the safety of every person who boarded a plane, knowing that her words were grounded in saltwater, steel, and unbreakable resolve. Below her seat, the engines hummed. Beside her, Mark sat, a quiet pillar of support. And ahead lay horizons both literal and metaphorical, uncharted realms where the lessons of Flight 452 would guide explorers, engineers, and dreamers into safer skies and deeper seas alike.
The morning sunlight danced on the Thames as Claire Donovan and Mark Henderson disembarked from a black London taxi. Before them loomed the sleek glass facade of the Royal Society, where scholars and decision-makers from around the globe had convened for the International Maritime Safety Forum. Today's theme, Bridging Skies and Seas. Inside the grand entrance hall, marble floors reflected banners proclaiming "From Wreck to Research" and "One Ocean, One Sky, Integrated Safety." Delegates in business attire and lab coats exchanged greetings over cups of Earl Grey tea. Claire adjusted her blazer, the silver dolphin pendant peeking from beneath her blouse, and took a steadying breath.
Today, she wasn't alone. Mark walked at her side, ready to share the podium and the mission they had built together. Their first session was a panel discussion on multidisciplinary safety standards. Claire stepped to the lectern, greeted by a ripple of applause. "Good morning," she began, voice imbued with the calm confidence of years at sea and in scientific conferences alike. Flight 452 taught us that safety can never be siloed. The forces that break an airframe on water are the same forces that shape our oceans: pressure, turbulence, and unpredictable currents. She clicked her remote, and behind her appeared a split-screen animation. On one side, high-fidelity simulation of water flow around a fuselage. On the other, sonar scans of wreckage fields. By integrating aviation industry data with oceanographic models, we can predict impact dynamics more accurately, designing engines, fuselage structures, and flotation systems that anticipate real-world conditions rather than idealized tests. A hand from the audience rose. An oceanographer asked about data accessibility. "Dr. Donovan, how do we ensure that airlines and marine researchers share proprietary flight recorder and seabed mapping data effectively?" Claire met his gaze. "Through pre-competitive consortia," she replied. "We've established a neutral research consortium, Sky-Sea Alliance, where stakeholders contribute anonymized telemetry and bathymetry data under mutually agreed confidentiality. In return, they gain shared insights without compromising commercial interests." She advanced to a slide showing the consortium's membership: major engine manufacturers, naval research institutes, and 20-plus universities. Then Mark took the mic. "And beyond engines, we're training rescue teams using real-time ocean current simulations," he explained. "By collaborating with Coast Guard and RNLI units, we deploy software that overlays flight path predictions onto marine charts. So if an aircraft must ditch, first responders know where debris and survivors will drift hours before they arrive." The audience murmured in appreciation as Mark demonstrated a live feed from a recent drill off Cornwall's coast. Coast Guard helicopters coordinating with rescue boats to intercept simulated survivors using the integrated model. "Our trials reduced average response times by 30% and improved survivor recovery rates by 20%. After the panel, Claire and Mark moved between breakout sessions. In one room, they discussed material science advances with engineers, exploring new composite alloys for fan case reinforcement. In another, they joined a workshop where human factors psychologists modeled passenger behavior during rapid decompression and water evacuation. Claire was struck by how each discipline's expertise intertwined with the next, no longer isolated silos, but a woven tapestry of safety. In the afternoon's keynote hall, Claire delivered her formal address, harnessing the ocean's lessons for aviation safety. She recounted her first dive on Trident 1, the eerie silence of the deep, and the fractured engine blades she studied under floodlight. Then, with steady emotion, she addressed the families in the audience. "Your loved ones rest in the deep, but their stories have become beacons, guiding us towards safer designs and swifter rescues." She paused as the room filled with quiet understanding. Following her speech, a panel of government delegates announced their intention to draft international standards under the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, incorporating oceanographic criteria into ditching certification protocols. The applause that followed was both triumphant and solemn, a testament to collective resolve. As evening fell, the forum hosted a reception at the Tate Modern's Riverside Terrace. Claire and Mark mingled with new colleagues, marine engineers from Japan, FAA regulators from the United States, oceanographers from Australia, and airline safety officers from Europe. Each conversation deepened the network they had seeded months ago, turning it into a living, growing community. When the moon rose over the Thames, Claire and Mark slipped away from the crowd and strolled along the south bank. The low hum of the city mixed with the river's gentle lapping against embankments. Claire looked at Mark, gratitude in her eyes. From that night in the Pacific to here, who would have thought? He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. We did. And this is just the beginning. They paused beneath the glowing London Eye, its capsules reflecting stars both real and artificial. In that moment, they felt the convergence of their journey. The haunting memory of Flight 452's crash, the intimate struggle against sharks in the dark, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge and safety. All of it had led to this crossroads where disciplines met to protect lives in sky and sea. Claire closed her eyes, listening to the river's currents and the distant murmur of the city. Tomorrow, she would join ICAO working groups. Next month, she'd co-author an international guidelines handbook. And in the years ahead, she would pilot deep-sea missions to other historic wrecks, each time returning with data to inform the next generation of aviation safety. But tonight, she simply stood beside Mark, in a foreign city whose river carried both history and hope. And as they gazed at the illuminated skyline, they knew that beyond the horizon, whether in the azure sky or the deep blue sea, new challenges awaited. Yet, armed with shared knowledge, unwavering partnership, and the legacy of Flight 452, they were ready to meet them. 6 months had passed since the Royal Society Forum, and the skyline of aviation safety was already changing. In Washington, D.C., legislative staff conferred late into the evenings over the draft Ditching Resilience Act, informed by Dr. Claire Donovan's deep-sea research and Mark Henderson's survivor accounts. Meanwhile, at Claire's coastal lab, engineers tested new composite fan case prototypes under hyperbaric conditions. This morning, Claire stepped onto the floor of the Congressional hangar at Andrews Air Force Base, where a retrofitted commercial airframe awaited its ditching trials in a vast seawater tank. High-speed cameras nestled in submersible housings, motion sensors dotted the fuselage, and researchers monitored data feeds on a bank of screens. She carried the silver dolphin pendant in her pocket, a talisman of hope she'd clasp whenever nerves threatened to unmoor her. Mark joined her at the tank's edge, observing the test article. The modified wing pylons glinted with ceramic matrix lining. "Ready?" he asked, voice low. Claire nodded. "Let's send her down." The mock aircraft descended into the tank on a hydraulic cradle, bowing nose first until just the tail remained above the waves. At a signal, powerful pistons accelerated the nose toward the water at 6 meters per second, simulating a high vertical speed ditching. Instruments recorded impact forces exceeding 1,200 kilonewtons. The sensors relayed strain data in real time.
As the fuselage breached the surface, a wall of water engulfed the cabin windows. Underwater, viewers tracked the pylon's energy-absorbing struts bending under load, dissipating shock before it could propagate into the wing root. The composite fan case held its form, containing blade fragments within the nacelle. The aft fuselage remained intact, no catastrophic breakup, no secondary ruptures. Claire's heart pounded as the airframe bobbed back to rest. She exchanged a look with Mark, both knew what this meant. On the banks, engineers cheered. The lead FAA engineer leaned forward, eyes bright. The modified design had dramatically reduced structural fragmentation, preserving the cabin's buoyancy cells and exit hatches. Moments later, Claire joined the debrief podium. Today's test validates our core hypothesis. By reinforcing engine containment and integrating sacrificial absorbers, we can maintain fuselage integrity during high-velocity water impacts, she announced to the assembled press and policymakers. This breakthrough not only saves lives in ditching events, but enhances crashworthiness in any forced landing scenario. Clicking through the post-test data slides, she showed side-by-side comparisons, the old engine design's fractured remnants strewn across the tank floor versus the new model's contained debris and intact cabin. She emphasized that these design changes added only 1.8 pounds per engine and incurred negligible fuel burn penalties. After her presentation, reporters swarmed Claire and Mark. One asked about implementation timelines. Claire smiled, recalling the Ditching Resilience Act's provisions. The bill mandates certification of these upgrades within 2 years. Airlines will retrofit new engines in production and existing fleets at scheduled maintenance intervals. Another inquired about global adoption. Mark assured them that ICAO standards would follow, uniting regulators worldwide under a common safety umbrella. That afternoon, Claire and Mark traveled to the FAA's Flight Standards District Office, where the administrator formally announced provisional certification guidance. Standing beneath a banner that read, "Safer Skies, Stronger Ships," the administrator praised Claire's scientific leadership and Mark's impassioned advocacy.
The room erupted in applause as the FAA committed to funding additional research and offering incentives for early operator adoption. Driving home along the winding coastal highway, Claire gazed at the restless Pacific below, its surface now a partner in safety rather than a threat. She reached into her pocket for the dolphin pendant, rolling it between her fingers. "We did it," she whispered. Mark glanced over, a proud smile warming his eyes. "You did it." In the months that followed, industry workshops buzzed with engineers retesting blueprints. University labs collaborated on improved materials, and rescue agencies revamped their simulation software to incorporate Claire's ocean current models. At airports, safety briefings were updated to include ditching protocols refined by the research team. But beyond technical halls and legislative chambers, a more human legacy took shape. Survivors of minor water landings, once shaken by aftershocks of terror, found renewed confidence in the aircraft that now bore stronger, more resilient engines. Families of Flight 452's victims took solace in knowing that no future passengers would face the same structural vulnerabilities. One evening, Claire and Mark received a thank you note from an airline captain who'd led a successful ditching off the coast of Sardinia, citing the new standards as instrumental in preserving his aircraft's integrity. Claire pinned the letter to her lab's corkboard, alongside photographs from the Andrews tank test and sketches from the ICAO workshop. Standing before the board, she reflected on the journey. From the fractured hull under Trident I's floodlights to the Capitol's witness table, from the halls of the Royal Society to the FAA's test tank. Each step had built on the last, an unbroken chain of inquiry, courage, and compassion. Mark slipped an arm around her waist. "What's next?" he asked. Claire looked at the dolphin pendant, then at the open ocean beyond her window. More wrecks to explore, more data to gather, and maybe stories to tell, so the world remembers why we fly and why we trust the sea. He nodded. "Then let's set sail." Together they turned toward the next horizon, where broken wings and ocean depths met innovation, and where the legacy of Flight 452 would continue to inspire safer skies and seas for generations to come. Months had turned into years since the fateful night when Flight 452 met the Pacific's cold embrace. In that time, Dr. Claire Donovan and Mark Henderson had traversed the globe, championing safety reforms, leading deep-sea expeditions, and weaving together the communities of aviators, oceanographers, and first responders. Yet despite the accolades and the tangible improvements in ditching survivability, Claire felt the pull of unfinished stories lying silent on the seabed. It was a clear morning in late spring when Claire and Mark arrived at the port of Honolulu, where the research vessel Aloha Spirit awaited. Her hull bore the scars of previous voyages, stripes of salt residue, patches of fresh paint, and on deck, technicians prepared the latest remote-operated vehicle, ROV, Argus II, for deployment. With 5,000 meters of tether, Argus II could reach depths far beyond the 3,500-foot resting place of Flight 452. Claire watched the ROV's illuminated camera arm be lowered into the turquoise waters. As the orange floodlights pierced the surface, she felt the familiar tingle of anticipation and trepidation. This mission had a dual purpose: first, to revisit Flight 452's wreck for long-term environmental monitoring; second, to document a nearby site rumored to house another historic airframe, an uncharted accident from decades past. Mark joined her at the rail, checking his tablet that displayed real-time naval charts and sonar overlays. Depth to Wreck 1 is 600 meters. Wreck 2 sits about 2 kilometers to the southeast at 1,200 meters. Claire nodded. "Let's start with Flight 452. Argus 2's new HD sonar should give us pristine imagery of any sediment shifts or corrosion and let us track how marine life has colonized the wreck over time. Below deck, the ROV control station hummed to life. Claire and Mark slipped on headsets. The main monitor flickered, then revealed a grainy but steadily sharpening view of the ocean's mid-column. As Argus 2 descended, the glow of its lights revealed suspended particles, then distant shapes emerging from the gloom. The twisted tail section of Flight 452, now coated in orange rust and draped in delicate coral fans. Claire inhaled. "Steady?" she murmured. Argus 2 glided closer, its manipulator arms gently brushing away fine silt to reveal the serial numbers on a pylon strut. The inscriptions were still legible. Engine cohort CF34-8E, matching the batch involved in the original investigation. One of the engineers on the surface team, Dr. Sunita Patel, noted, "No new fractures, structure appears stable, corrosion levels within projected parameters." On screen, schools of lanternfish darted around the wing spars. A moray eel slithered across a cabin panel where a compressed oxygen canister still sat wedged in its mount. Claire leaned forward, entranced by the silent ballet of sea life reclaiming human artifacts.
"These organisms are crucial indicators of material fatigue," she said softly. "Their growth patterns can tell us volume changes in metal over time." After half an hour of mapping and sampling, the ROV crew collected small corrosion nodules for lab analysis. Claire's mind raced with hypotheses about cathodic protection and biofouling, data that could refine maintenance schedules and improve future crash site preservation. Once Argus 2 ascended past thermocline turbulence, the team redirected it toward the second wreck. Sonar imagery had suggested an aircraft fuselage lying at an unusual angle, partly buried in sediment. The goal was to confirm the identity and condition of this forgotten crash, one that, until now, had avoided any formal investigation. Descending again into the blue, Argus 2's lights found the faint outline of an aluminum shell. As the cameras focused, Claire's breath caught. The tail number, etched into a corroded stabilizer, matched an old naval transport that had disappeared in a storm in 1978. Its disappearance had become legend among local fishermen, but no formal survey had ever been conducted. "This is incredible," Claire whispered. "We're looking at nearly 50 years underwater." Mark guided the ROV arms to clear a patch of silt, revealing a rusted uniform zipper and a fragment of a Polaroid photo entangled in fishing line. The photo's image, though faded, showed 4 smiling aircrew, their faces forever captured in a sunlit hangar. Dr. Patel's voice crackled through the comms. "Environmental samples here show no significant hydrocarbon leakage after all these decades. The site is remarkably contained." Claire felt a profound respect for the wreck and its unspoken history. "We should document carefully, then leave it undisturbed. This site deserves the same dignity as Flight 452's, its own museum on the seabed." As Argus 2 began its ascent for data transfer, Claire and Mark exchanged satisfied smiles. They had not only deepened understanding of Flight 452's long-term impact, but also uncovered a new chapter in aviation's undersea archives. Back on the deck of Aloha Spirit, Claire reviewed the hours of high-resolution footage. Biologists discussed the emergence of black coral colonies on the older wreck. Material scientists debated revised corrosion rate models. Navy representatives prepared to liaise with the descendants of the 1978 crew for closure and commemoration.
That evening, under a canopy of stars and lanterns strung along the ship's railing, Claire raised a glass of sparkling water. "To the forgotten histories," she toasted, "and to telling their stories with respect." Mark clinked his glass against hers. "And to many more discoveries, above and below." The glow of the island lights shimmered on the horizon, mirroring the bioluminescent trails left by passing plankton.
In that convergence of human memory and ocean's timeless choreography, Claire felt the full circle of her journey, a story that began with tragedy, anchored in survival, expanded through science, and blossomed into a legacy of remembrance and discovery. As the ROV's lights faded into the deep once more, Claire and Mark stood together at the ship's stern, listening to the gentle hum of generators and the distant call of night birds. Ahead lay uncharted depths, silent witnesses to humanity's triumphs and failures. And, they knew, the next stories waiting patiently to be told. The dawn light filtered through her cabin porthole as Claire Donovan stirred awake to the gentle sway of Aloha spirit returning to Honolulu Harbor. The ROV operations had concluded, data secured, and artifacts respectfully cataloged. Yet, even as the coastline's silhouette drew nearer, Claire felt that familiar tug of curiosity, the ocean's final secrets still whispering beneath the waves. Beside her, Mark Henderson slept soundly, exhaustion from weeks of non-stop research softened by the promise of home. Over coffee in the mess hall, crew members shared highlights. Dr. Sunita Patel's excitement over the black coral specimens, the sonar team's pride in mapping the 1978 wreck, and the Navy liaison's plans for a memorial dive. Claire listened, sipping slowly, reflecting on how far they had come from the night Flight 425 shattered beneath the moonless Pacific. What began as a desperate struggle for survival had grown into a worldwide movement for safety, remembrance, and scientific exploration. Later that morning, Claire and Mark stood on the deck as the ship glided alongside the pier. Family members, friends, and local dignitaries gathered, leis in hand, cameras ready, to welcome them back. Flashes of cameras and calls of "Welcome home, Claire" echoed across the water.
She found herself enveloped in hugs, colleagues relieved at the mission's success, young students inspired by her lectures, even a group of Fishermen's Association members who had long told tales of deep-sea mysteries. Each embrace grounded her in community and purpose. Mark watched with pride as Claire handed over the dolphin pendant, newly polished, to Captain Nakamura of the Aloha Spirit as a token of gratitude for safe passage. "For guiding us through the currents, both seen and unseen," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. The captain accepted, eyes glistening, and pinned it to his uniform. In that moment, the pendant became more than a symbol of one aircraft's story. It embodied the bond between sea and sky, researcher and rescuer. In the weeks that followed, Claire returned to her coastal cottage, transformed. Her study overflowed with deep-sea samples awaiting analysis, while her inbox brimmed with invitations to keynote at international conferences, to consult on marine-inspired engineering projects, and to mentor a new generation of interdisciplinary scientists. Yet, she carved out mornings to walk the shoreline with Mark, collecting shells and sharing quiet insights. The Pacific's rhythmic pulse had become her compass, guiding both her research and her healing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire and Mark hosted a small gathering on the beach. Friends, colleagues, and a few survivors of Flight 452. A bonfire crackled, warming the sea-cooled air. Survivors shared reflections, how the memory of splintered fuselage and circling sharks had given way to a deep appreciation for life's fragility and the power of human kindness. Claire listened, humbled by their words, remembering the child's terrified gaze and the father's desperate hope that had first set her on this path. As stars emerged overhead, Mark raised a glass of sparkling cider. "To those we lost," he began, voice resonant in the night air, "and to those whose courage has saved countless lives since, may our work honor their memory and light the way for others." Glasses clinked, voices murmured assent, and the fire's glow danced on faces both solemn and hopeful. In that circle of companionship, Claire felt the full weight and blessing of their shared legacy. Later, alone on the beach, Claire traced the shoreline where salt water met sand.
She thought of the fragments of Flight 452, now resting gently on the seafloor, entwined with coral and creatures of the deep. She thought of the 1978 transport, once forgotten, now dignified by respectful study, and she envisioned all the stories yet untold, crashes, discoveries, reforms, that would animate her future expeditions. Claire closed her eyes, letting the ocean's lullaby fill her mind, and whispered a silent vow to continue bearing witness, to transform loss into learning, and to nurture the alliance of aviation and ocean science she and Mark had forged. When she opened her eyes, the first light of a new day glittered across the waves, an unspoken promise of further horizons to explore and further lives to protect.